CyberCube has recently published its Global Threat Briefing for H1. I'm Yvette Essen, Head of Content and Communications and Creative for CyberCube, and joining me to talk about that report is the author, William Altman. He is the Cyber Threat Intelligence Principal for CyberCube. William, can you tell me a little bit about this report? First of all, what exactly is the Global Threat Briefing?
Yeah, absolutely, Yvette. The Global Threat Briefing is part of CyberCube Concierge, our threat intelligence service at CyberCube, specifically built for the insurance and reinsurance industries. You know, we recognize that folks can go out there and get traditional threat intel from big threat intel partners. It's valuable information, but it's often not purpose-built for the types of questions that insurers are facing when it comes to cyber risk. And CyberCube is wholly dedicated to cyber insurance. That means our threat intel program is purpose-built to answer the types of questions that matter most to insurance companies. And we even do some really unique analysis with CyberCube's data, asking the question, is the US market getting more or less secure over time? That's really what you can expect from CyberCube's Global Threat Report.
I mean, there is a lot in this report. I mean, it goes on with different sectors, some of which you've touched upon. I mean, here I'm looking at a good 12 pages of different topics and things that we're talking about. But perhaps you can just highlight a few of those.
Yeah, of course. So we start the report really by highlighting a sector that is high risk today. Healthcare. We know the healthcare industry is under attack, and we called this out in January specifically that there is aggregation risk around single point of failure technologies in the US healthcare system specifically. Recently, we've all experienced this Change Healthcare breach and outage that has proven that theory correct, and we're advising clients today to look closely at healthcare in their books of business for aggregation risk, to use our SPOF intelligence tool to do so. So we cover this in the report. We talk about some past attacks and lessons learned against healthcare, but we also highlight one other sector in the report, and this is really an important piece of our work. We looked at the public sector. We specifically examined the public sector, state and local governments in the US for their susceptibility to cyber attacks. And we did this because it's an election year, not only in the US, but half the world's population will participate in an election this year. And so we're really looking at these networks because these are the networks that receive a lot of attention during this time of year from an espionage and destruction standpoint. So something we're continuing to track throughout the year and advising clients on.
I'd like to find out a little bit more information about two of those things you've mentioned. Let's start with the elections.
Sure.
Election year in the US, and we also touch upon quite a lot of activity in terms of electoral activity in Europe. Can you tell me, what does this report say about elections?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, specifically, we look at exposure and we look at security, two different measurements of cyber risk that CyberCube has perfected quantifying. We look at inherent exposure in the public sector and in healthcare, for example. They're both highly exposed industries. That means that they hold lots of sensitive data, for example, and overall they're very attractive to threat actors. They're going to get attacked. We see this evidenced in the ransomware reports and the data. The public sector is under attack. We also look at security in the face of that inherent exposure. We want to measure how well an entity in that industry is satisfying the core elements of the NIST cybersecurity framework and others. And if we can do that, we can start to understand security at the company level and at the industry level. And if you look at healthcare and security, they're both average security. So they're not the worst we've seen, but they certainly are not secure enough in the face of their inherent exposure for underwriters to approach those industries like they might have a couple years ago. Things are different now. The public sector specifically is undersecured relative to the threats it faces. These state and local governments and their election infrastructure are targets from nation-state threat actors, the 1% most advanced threat actors on the planet. They don't need just basic security. They need nation-state level security to secure our election. So it's going to require tremendous partnerships between the public and private sector, between state and local governments and election infrastructure vendors to work together to really secure our election this time around. So that's what CyberCube is looking at and what we're tracking in relation to both those industries.
Now, you've mentioned the public sector, you've mentioned the healthcare sector. This report also does identify which companies, which sectors we feel actually could be vulnerable and likely to be prone to an attack, depending on how secure they are. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So CyberCube can put our exposure and security scores together. And by putting them together on a matrix, an XY axes, we can start to see where companies fall or where industries fall from a low exposure, low security, or high exposure, high security standpoint, where high exposure and low security would result in a highest risk sector. There are actually 8 sectors today tracked by CyberCube that we determine are highest risk. Telecommunications, arts and entertainment, finance, healthcare are among them. These are the industries that are highly exposed and undersecured relative to that exposure. So we always work with underwriters as part of our threat intelligence program to teach them how to address the risks in these industries specifically and how to achieve their underwriting goals with more due diligence and more care when it comes to cyber. And they can use our products, our analytics, our data, and all our services to do that.
Great, thank you, William. A copy of the Global Threat Briefing H1 report can be found on our website, www.cybercube.com. For CyberCube, I'm Yvette Essen.